So welcome once again to the dark side, folks, and today we have the real life account of a daring robbery that yielded a cool £26 million or $39 million at the time of the heist, a sum that translates with inflation to a massive $138 million in today's money. A robbery that in criminal circles became lauded as one of the most audacious and successful of robberies on a global scale. But before we get into that, I'd like to ask you to please subscribe to this fledgling channel, slam that like button and slap a high five on the notifications bell so that you'll be notified as and when new content is available from yours truly. Now without further ado, let's take a closer look at the infamous Brinks gold bullion robbery that took place in a warehouse close to Heathrow Airport in London back in 1983. Having more money than we even know what to do with is the common dream of many. In a perfect fantasy, this wealth comes about with far less work associated with it than any honest route could yield. Ill-gotten gains from a well-executed and almost non-violent bank robbery, the stuff of dreams. But for the most part, the majority of us aspire to have great wealth, aspire to have the kind of lifestyle that we see led by celebrities, royalty or successful entrepreneurs. But for the majority of law-abiding people with untold wealth, it generally stems from hard work and determination. Now it's that last part that tends to trip some people up. Putting in many years of hard work with a fixed determination to hopefully strike it rich as a business plan is implemented is the traditional way of making it big. Now in some cases the rewards can be massive and come about a lot quicker, especially in the modern age, given the technological leaps and bounds society has accomplished in recent years. Now some folks look to chase that financial payoff, but without putting in the investment of time and effort. Instead, they prefer to take what's not theirs, and with force if necessary. These are your hardened career criminals. Now, to understand what makes a good criminal, one first has to do away with the common misconception that they are of lower intelligence. On the contrary, a successful career criminal is someone who doesn't attract the attention of the authorities, someone who, to coin a phrase, likes to fly under the radar. These individuals prefer to walk away at the slightest sniff of law enforcement. They tend not to take the risks beyond those associated with their carefully hatched plans. Now, 3 of the 6 criminals in today's case are such individuals. Their identities, along with the majority of the proceeds gained from this robbery, remain a mystery to this day. It seems to all extents and purposes that they got away with the almost perfect crime. Now, the story of the largest gold heist in British history is also a cautionary tale about how tenuous the concept is of honour amongst thieves, especially given the amount of money we're talking about. However, it seems errors of judgment were made on all sides. Despite the short-sightedness of some of the criminals involved, throwing money around like water, the police also failed to catch the majority of those involved. Anthony Black was a security guard employed by the Johnson Matthews bankers at their distribution warehouse on the Heathrow International Trading Estate in London, close to the international airport. Now, the name of the company running the warehouse has become synonymous with audacious gold bullion heists in the minds of many. It's a name that rolls off the tongue with an almost criminal intent: Brinks. Anthony was, at the time, the common law husband of the sister of a career criminal by the name of Brian Robinson, an individual known by many in the underworld at that time as the Colonel. This was attributed to the almost military precision with which he planned and executed many of his crimes. Now, in the early hours of the 26th of November 1983, a van slowly patrolled the streets in the vicinity of the warehouse. With windows tinted and no noticeable markings to give it away, it blended in perfectly with the nondescript streets. Inside, a South London gang of 6 armed and ready career criminals fidgeted as they made their way to their target. Their adrenaline began to rise as the target came into sight, beads of sweat forming on their brows. The lead criminal, the planner, aka the Colonel, was about to engage in his most brazen and defining attack of his career. Sat to his right was another well-known face in London's underworld, Mad Mickey McAvoy, who was known for his short fuse and violent tendencies. He was someone not to be messed with. Now, another identified member of the gang was a stocky bull of a man, an infamous armed robber at the time, a guy by the name of Tony White. Now, these three and the remaining unidentified members of their gang were about to embark on a robbery that would catapult their endeavour as being the most audacious of British crimes even to this day. Now, in the early hours, security guard Michael Scouse had unlocked the staff access door to the Brinks mat warehouse. He was joined by additional guards Robin Risley and Peter Bentley. They were all ex-forces and had worked on the security detail for this company for a number of years. Being the shift leader on this fateful morning, it was Robin Risley's responsibility to ensure the shift ran without a hitch. Now, it came as no surprise to them that Anthony Black, the fourth member of their detail, appeared to be late. After all, it wasn't the first time. After having done the rounds to ensure that everything in the warehouse was as it should be, the guards retired to the kitchen area where they prepared for breakfast, starting with the traditional morning cup of tea. Now, it was only at that point that the doorbell rang and in walked Anthony Black, the last member of that day's security detail. His apologies for being late were met with good-mannered jesting as Robin and the other guards set about breakfast on what would be an anything but normal shift. Now, just a few minutes later, at precisely 06:40 a.m, as guard Robin Risley lifted a cup of steaming tea to his lips, the door of the canteen burst open and in flooded 6 dark-clothed attackers, each of them brandishing either a handgun or a semi-automatic rifle. The air erupted with profanity-laden threats and crude gestures. The guards were made to lie face down with their hands behind their backs, and it was only once the initial shock entrance of these criminals was complete and with all the guards placated did the noise abate. The calm and calculated voice of the colonel took over. Having by this time had Hessian bags placed over their heads, it was obvious what the gang were after. With their planning and information they received, they were expecting to walk away with around £3.2 million in cash, an equivalent sum of around $4.6 million at the time. They were about to get the shock of their lives. Now, it comes as no surprise that this job could only have run as smoothly as it did if the gang had had inside information. And that information came by way of Brian Robinson's sister's common-law husband, security guard Anthony Black. Black had been meeting with the gang for a number of weeks prior to the robbery over beers at local pubs. During those weeks, a plan was hatched, and part of Black's tasking was to take photographs of the internal layout of the warehouse so the team would know their whereabouts at all times. This in turn led to a heightened familiarity of the site by the criminals, and it was something recalled by more than one of the captive guards when they eventually came to make their police statements after the robbery. When all was said and done, Anthony Black's information gave the gang unchallenged access to the site and allowed them to quickly and effectively neutralise the security measures such as alarms, sensors and cameras that were dotted all around the warehouse. Now, remember that this event took place prior to the invention of the internet, so there were no direct feeds to a central security hub, for example. Once blacked out, the location was free from the gaze of the outside world. Now, the one main point during the planning phase was knowing when to hit the warehouse for the best returns. Given he was privy to the details of the contents of the safes, it again rested on the shoulders of Anthony Black to give word when the best time would be to rob the facility. It was decided that he would simply make a telephone call from a payphone that was located inside the warehouse on the day prior to the attack, using the agreed upon phrase, "Let's go fishing this evening." Once the gang got this call, the planners then knew that the job was on for the next morning and that their haul would be substantial. Now, after a series of threats, Robin Risley could feel liquid being splashed on his clothes. With the thickness of the Hessian masking the initial odour, it was soon apparent to him that the liquid he was being doused with was in fact petroleum. Once soaked, a voice close to his ear made the almost whispered demand, "Open the safes or we'll burn you alive." The threat was reinforced by the sound of a match being struck behind his head. Not needing to be told twice, Robin was led to the vault door that led to the 3 main storage rooms in the warehouse. At this point, it was conveyed to the gang that the action to open the vault required 2 people, one to administer the combinations and the other to turn the keys. Upon hearing that, the gang then doused the second guard, Michael Scouse, with petroleum and informed the 2 that should they make any sudden moves, that they would happily be set alight. All that remained between the gang and their bounty were 11 locks, 3 doors and 5 alarms. Now, Robin Risley could feel the panic in him rising. While he knew the combination to the main door, he wasn't sure of the new combinations to the 3 internal doors within the main storage area. Once inside the first door, he set about making things look like he knew the combinations. And while waiting for Robin to open the doors, the gang soon became aware of a pile of grey nondescript cases that were neatly stacked in the middle of the room. Now, approaching the cases, the gang thought this would be an additional bounty of cash. Upon opening the first case, they soon realised the true gravity of their situation, for it was not money that greeted their gaze, but the unmistakable sheen of pure gold bars. And it wasn't just 1 or 2 bars. The gang had happened on a stash of almost 3 tons of pure gold. In addition to the gold bullion, there was also a pile of uncut diamonds destined for the Far East, and these glistening stones added a further value of around £100,000 or $145,000 to their haul. The total haul, with the diamonds and gold at the time of the robbery, was estimated to be valued at around a cool £26 million, or the equivalent of $38,893,400. But now they were in a true predicament. For what was expected to be a simple smash and grab job had now turned into a long and protracted removal of this massive haul. Fortunately for the gang, and unfortunately for the security detail, the warehouse was a simple storage facility, and thus it was not due the arrival of any additional personnel until the planned security change some 12 hours later. With all the alarms and security sensors disabled, they had all the time necessary to remove the haul, and they did so by using a forklift truck within the facility to move the gold to their waiting van. However, it soon became apparent that the transport of so many tons of gold wouldn't be possible with the transport that they arrived in, so members of the gang were instructed by the colonel to head out and look for sturdier transport. Using the warehouse's forklift truck to load the gold into the getaway vehicle, it still took them almost 2 hours to clear the safe of its contents. By 8:15, they were done. The haul was loaded and they were good to go. At 8:30, the alarm was raised by one of the guards who had managed to slip free of his restraints. Now, the task of converting the gold bullion into cash was to prove a major headache for the gang, and they were forced to approach a senior underworld figure known only as the Fox in order to do so. This shadowy figure had the necessary gangland connections to smelt down and distribute the gold, specifically with the assistance of the infamous Adams family, one of London's most notorious crime syndicates. They also recruited a jeweller by the name of Solly Nahum, who agreed to sell on the smelted down goods. The gang now found themselves in a situation that none of them had ever thought they would be in, that of being in possession of an amount of almost pure gold that would prove almost impossible to sell back into the market with any efficiency and speed. The international regulation of gold supplies to market is controlled in such a way as to maintain its value. And with a bunch of crooks in London looking to offload such a massive amount of gold as soon as possible, the result would only drive the value of the gold down on a global scale by simply increasing available stocks. Now, fortunately for the gold markets of the world, the act of smelting down the gold from this haul would prove to be a massive hindrance to the gang, and is something that is suggested as being a continuing problem even to this day. The police investigation to the raid took off in no time. Upon initial findings, it was clear that the raid had been accomplished with intricate and almost military precision. So it came as no surprise that the general consensus was that the precision of the raid could only have been accomplished with the benefit of inside help. The police turned their attention to looking at greater detail at the security team and their backgrounds, and what they found was about to blow the case wide open. Being one of the newest members of the security detail, it came as a massive shock to the investigating entities that Anthony Black was in fact the common law husband to the sister of one of London's most notorious armed robbers, a one Brian Robinson, aka the Colonel. From here it was thought it would be a simple case to crack, but how wrong they were. It wasn't long before Anthony Black, under intense questioning, was singing like the proverbial canary. He soon gave up Brian Robinson, Mad Mickey McAvoy and Tony White, as these were the only members of the gang that he had ever met during the planning of the robbery over beers at the local watering holes. The identity of the 3 remaining gang members remains a mystery, to this day. Now, convictions were quick on the heels of the investigation. Brian Robinson, aka the Colonel, was arrested in December of 1983. Both Robinson and Mad Mickey McAvoy were sentenced to 25 years of jail after their trials in December of 1984. Prior to his incarceration, McAvoy had entrusted his share of the gold to a selection of friends and acquaintances. His thinking that the age-old maxim of honour amongst thieves would yield true, and that he would, on his release, be repatriated with untold wealth, at least enough to last out his golden years of retirement. His action of entrusting others to smelt and distribute the sale of his share of gold would set into motion a series of deadly events that some say are still in motion to this day. A series of events that London's underworld are known to simply refer to as the Brinks curse. Numerous people from this point eventually became embroiled in attempts to distribute the gold in a way so not as to attract too much attention, although this proved to be harder said than done. Of the people entrusted by McAvoy to take care of his share of the bullion, it was a character by the name of Brian Perry who ended up engaging the help of an Essex-based gangster by the name of Kenneth Noy. While Noy was a career criminal known to local and national police forces, he was also someone who had quite a semblance of acumen. He understood the difficulties of smelting and redistributing gold on such a scale. Gold, in order for it to become legitimised, needs certificate of authenticity and receipts in order for it to be seen as verified and authentic. It was also only with such paperwork could he then engage in legitimate sales. With this in mind, Noy travelled to the island of Jersey, where he proceeded to purchase 17 bars of gold for the tidy price of about £100,000 or $148,000. He then planned to use the certificates and receipts that he received for those gold bars to act as the required paperwork to accompany the gold bars from the Brinks robbery that he would subsequently smelt down and offer up for sale. A grand plan indeed. Shockwaves were still reverberating around the gold industry when Noy made his purchase in Jersey, so much so that the bank where he made the purchase opted to tip the police off once the transaction was completed. This then placed Noy under the close scrutiny of the team investigating the case. He was further implicated when large sums of cash were moved through a Bank of England bank account that he had at a branch in the small town of Bristol in the southwest of the UK. A close observation team was subsequently assigned to watch Noy's home in January of 1985 for any suspicious activity linking Noy to the proceeds of the robbery. Now, it was on the night of the 26th of January 1985 that during one of these surveillance missions that the actions of 45-year-old Detective Constable John Fordham and a colleague disturbed the Alsatian dogs on Noy's property, whose barking alerted the homeowner. Thinking he was being burgled, Noy armed himself with a knife and ventured into his garden. On finding John Fordham on his premises, he set about the police officer, who was subsequently killed after being stabbed 11 times. At the resulting trial, Noy was acquitted by the jury, who sided with the defence lawyers, suggesting that Noy acted out of self-defence of his property, thinking that he was being burgled. After all, how was he to know that the balaclava-wearing entity he found in his garden was a police officer? Kenneth Noy set about his attempts to smelt the legitimate gold bars, and in doing so he engaged the services of a known underworld entity by the name of Jonathan Palmer. Palmer was an established jeweller based out of the small market town of Bath, located close to the town of Bristol. Now, going back to the days just after the robbery, a couple saw a white-hot crucible in the back garden shed of a neighbour and called the police. All of the newspapers and TV news headlines being about the recent robbery, the neighbours thought this could be in connection, some way, to that crime. Now, a crucible, for those of you who don't know, is a ceramic or metal container into which metals or other substances may be melted or subjected to very high temperatures. Historically, crucibles were made from clay, but they can also be made from any material strong enough to withstand the temperatures required to alter the state of whatever is placed into them. Now, when the police arrived, they were shown the hut by the couple who had reported it, but they then said that they were unable to investigate further, as unfortunately for them, their jurisdiction didn't include the area occupied by the shed. Now, strangely, the couple were never asked to submit a police report or give evidence in court. There has also never been an explanation given as to why the relevant police force were never tasked with investigating the crucible incident at the time of it being reported. Now, it wouldn't be until some 14 months later that the relevant authorities with a search warrant would get to search the premises. It was found that the owner was indeed the one and only John Palmer, who had been fencing the smelted gold for Noy. Palmer was subsequently arrested on suspicion of involvement with the distribution of gold from the Brinks mat robbery. However, at his trial he was subsequently acquitted, given the fact that there was no solid proof that he knew the provenance of the gold. Now, for his part in the crime as the inside man, Anthony Black was sentenced to 6 years imprisonment. He's now a free man, or as free as one can expect to be after having been the key source of information to law enforcement. On his testimony, 3 key members of the gang, Brian Robinson, Mad Mickey McAvoy and Tony White, an infamous armed robber from London, were all arrested and subsequently tried for their involvement in the robbery. Both Robinson and McAvoy were sentenced to 25 years apiece, while Tony White got off due to a policing technicality. The law would also eventually catch up with Kenneth Noy, who in 1996 murdered a motorist by the name of Stephen Cameron during what appeared to be an apparent road rage incident. Bolting to Spain after the murder, he was arrested and extradited back to Britain some 2 years later in 1998 to stand trial for the murder. He was subsequently sentenced to life imprisonment 2 years later on the 14th of April 2000. Now, earlier in this story, I mentioned a series of events known simply as the Brinks-Mat curse. And this was the name attributed to a series of events leading to the demise of a number of criminal characters allegedly associated with this case. Now, given the intricacies of criminal networks, there were numerous entities entrusted with the smelting, distribution and safekeeping of all the ill-gotten gains from this robbery. The remaining 3 unidentified members of the gang were never caught, and thus far it is also suggested that the large percentage of the gold bullion has never been recovered. Some of those connected with the robbery are thought to be living a very pretty life somewhere, wherever they may be, whilst others didn't fare too well. Now, in 1990, a career criminal by the name of Charlie Wilson was found shot to death at his house in Marbella, Spain. Wilson was also a member of the gang involved in another of Britain's infamous crimes, the Great Train Robbery in 1964. It's understood that Wilson was allegedly hired to launder some of the proceeds from the robbery, but came up £3 million short. Another entity entrusted with the laundering of the proceeds, Donald Urquhart, was gunned down in broad daylight as he walked along the Marylebone High Street in January of 1993. He was in fact walking hand in hand with his Thai girlfriend when what police believe a professional hitman approached the couple from behind and shot his target twice in the head. The unknown killer was then said to have calmly stepped over the body and fired a 3rd shot again into the victim's head before jumping onto the back of a waiting motorcycle and making off into the busy London traffic. On the 5th of December 1998, jeweller Solly Nahom was shot dead outside his home in London's affluent Hatton Garden district. He had been a financier of the infamous Adams family crime syndicate who had been entrusted with the laundering of some of the proceeds from the Brinks-Mat robbery. Prior to his murder, one of Solly's associates, Gilbert Winter, was also abducted from his home on 9th of March 1998. Quite why the pair were murdered was open to speculation, but it was surmised by some as being simply as a way of causing disruption amongst those who had a greater connection to the laundering activities. 63-year-old Brian Perry, one of the associates of Mad Mickey McAvoy, who was entrusted to take care of McAvoy's proceeds from the heist, was shot dead as he arrived at a building he owned in South London. As a creature of habit, his daily pattern was simple to follow by the hired killer who pumped 3 slugs into the back of his head as he pulled into his parking spot on the 16th of November 2001. A couple of years later, on the 14th of May 2003, George Francis was shot dead by paid killer John O'Flynn outside Francis's courier business in Bermondsey, London. George Francis was a former associate of the infamous Cray twins and was believed to be involved with the laundering of the gold. Francis had previously survived an attempt on his life when he was shot in the shoulder in a pub that he ran in Essex in May 1985. Fast forward to June 24, 2014, Jonathan Goldfinger Palmer was murdered in his lavish country mansion in South Weald near Brentwood, Essex, UK. He was shot 6 times with a shotgun, although this was only found out during the post-mortem given that he had significant scarring from an open heart surgery. Now, it was known at the time of his death that he was also wanted in Spain on racketeering and firearms charges. It was also found out after his death that he had also been the first person to open a timeshare endeavour in Russia in the mid-90s. As previously stated, the intricacies of criminal networks involved in this case may never be fully understood. Equally, the identity of those involved, for the most part, remains shrouded in mystery. Now, one thing is obvious though, and that is that entities with connections to the case are still, to this day, going about settling old scores. Who knows when the Brinks-Mac curse will come to an end? Now, as a cautionary tale to those contemplating a life of crime, it's estimated that at today's gold prices, 3 tons of almost pure gold, as stolen in the raid, would be valued at around $168 million. To many, that should mean a golden retirement. But given the comedy of errors highlighted in this case, especially when it comes to trusting friends with ill-gotten gains, it just goes to show that money changes everyone, and often for the worst. Honour amongst thieves? Forget it. Brian Robinson, seen by many as the brains of the robbery, died almost penniless at a nursing home in London on February the 28th, 2021. Many friends and relatives openly state that he got shafted by the fraternity of thieves he trusted back in the day. Now, in a final one-fingered salute to law enforcement by Mad Mickey McAvoy, who was released from his incarceration in the year 2000. And upon his release, he moved from his lowly council-owned house into a much more lavish private home in the rolling British countryside. And it was a home into which he installed his own idea of security. 2 intimidating guard dogs that he aptly named Brinks and Matt. Well, there you have it, folks, a cautionary tale about the pitfalls of a life of crime. I guess all we ever see are those who have been involved in a life of crime who didn't succeed. But those who make the real money tend to be hidden, out of the limelight, silent. Now, if this video hit the spot, please feel free to give it a like. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and go ahead and slap the crap out of that notifications bell to get updates as and when new content is available from yours truly. As this is a new venture, I'm hoping to upload at least once a week, and maybe more if it gains traction. But until the next time, folks, take care, and I'll see you on the flip side.